don't belong in that aura, my brother said, loud enough for the entire surgical prep hallway to hear. Scrub out and go back to paperwork where you belong. The room went quiet. Someone dropped a metal tray. I didn't look at him. I just kept walking. I'd been a surgeon for 6 years. I'd done over 400 procedures. I had hands that didn't shake and a mind that didn't quit. And I'd spent my entire adult life proving something to a man who had never once asked to be impressed by me. My father is a legend in cardiothoracic surgery. His name is on a wing of Mercy General. His portrait hangs in the lobby next to the hospital's founding directors, a serious man in a white coat with grey at his temples, and a look on his face like he already knew you were going to disappoint him. Growing up, I thought that look was just how his face rested. It took me until my mid-20s to understand it was specifically for me. My brother is 3 years older than I am. He followed my father into cardiothoracics the way some sons follow their fathers into the family business, not because he was called to it, but because it was the path of least resistance toward becoming important. He had the name. He had the connections. He had a laugh that filled a room and a handshake my father called presidential. What he did not have, and what he spent considerable energy ensuring no one noticed, was anything close to my instincts in the operating room. I went into trauma surgery, not because it was glamorous. It isn't. It's brutal and fast, and it costs you sleep and relationships and sometimes a piece of yourself you don't get back. I went in because I am good at it. Because I think in fractions of seconds and I don't freeze and I don't need to be told twice. I went in because when someone is bleeding out on a table and there are 12 decisions to make in the next 4 minutes, I want to be the one making them. My father thought trauma was beneath the family name. He said that at Thanksgiving dinner once while passing the gravy. Trauma is reactive medicine, he said. It's firefighting. He said it the way someone describes a job they feel sorry for, the way people say bless their heart in the South when they mean something else entirely. My brother laughed and reached for the rolls. My mother looked at her plate. I looked at my father. I said, someone has to save the people who can't wait for an appointment. He said, that's very noble, sweetheart. And the conversation moved on. I am not his sweetheart. I am his daughter. He has never once seemed to understand that those are different things. I'd been at Mercy General for 2 years when the hospital announced a restructuring of the trauma division. New director coming in from outside, new protocols, new everything. The kind of administrative earthquake that sends half the staff updating their LinkedIn profiles at midnight. My brother, who worked in the cardiothoracic wing 3 floors up, had no professional reason to have opinions about any of this. He had opinions anyway. He started showing up to cross-departmental meetings he hadn't been invited to. He started mentioning to people, casually at the coffee station, in the elevator, that trauma surgery had morale problems, that there were performance concerns. He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Everyone knew whose sister I was. Everyone knew my father had funded the cardiothoracic expansion. The implication was a smell in the air, not a statement anyone could pin down. The first time I understood what he was doing, I was in the break room at 6 a.m. One of the senior attendings, a man named Dr. Parr, Garfield, who had always been perfectly civil to me, walked in, looked at me, and said, "Rough week for the department, huh?" with an expression I couldn't read. I said I didn't know what he meant. He got his coffee and left. I sat there for a long moment, then I went back to work. That's the thing about having a family like mine. You learn early that the ground is never entirely solid. You learn to keep your footing anyway. You learn that the performance review is happening all the time, whether you're in the room or not, and the only thing you can control is the quality of your work. So you make your work the only argument that matters. I documented everything, every case, every outcome. Every time I was on call when someone else should have been, I noted it. Every time a decision I made in the OR saved someone's outcome, it was in my files. Not because I planned to use it as ammunition, but because in a world where the ground shifts without warning, data is the closest thing to a foundation. I had a patient, I'll call him Mr. V, an older gentleman, a retired school teacher who came in after a car accident on I-95. His family was in the waiting room. His wife had her hands folded in her lap and kept very still the way people do when they're trying not to fall apart. I operated for 5 hours. He made it. He walked out of that hospital 11 days later and his wife cried in the lobby and held my hands and said, "God sent you to us." I thought about that a lot in the months that followed. I thought about it specifically on the afternoon my brother cornered me in the hallway outside radiology and told me I was an embarrassment to the family. He didn't say it quietly. He said I was playing hero in a department that didn't matter. He said I had always needed to be the center of attention. He said, and this is the part I have not forgotten, the part I turn over in my mind sometimes late at night. He said, "Dad agrees with me. He just doesn't want the argument." I looked at my brother for a long moment. I said, "Are you done?" He said something else. I didn't hear it. I was already walking away. The new trauma director arrived on a Tuesday in March. Her name was Dr. Osei. She had trained at Johns Hopkins, spent 8 years running the trauma department at a level 1 center in Chicago, and had published research on system-level outcomes in emergency surgical care that had changed protocols at 17 hospitals across the country. She wore her hair in close-cropped natural coils, and she had a way of listening that made you feel like she was already 3 steps ahead of what you were saying, cataloging, assessing, deciding. She did not make an announcement. She did not schedule a meet and greet. She showed up on a Tuesday and went directly to the floor and started observing. She watched us work, she watched the nurses, she watched the techs, she watched the handoff process between day and night shifts. She watched all of it without expression, taking occasional notes in a small leather notebook she kept in her coat pocket. My brother, I heard later, had requested a meeting with her through the chief of medicine. He wanted to share some context about the department. He used the word context. Dr. Graster, OC's assistant, told him her schedule was full for the foreseeable future. He requested again. Her schedule remained full. I watched this from the edges and said nothing. What I did instead was work. A GZFDU came in on a Thursday night. Gunshot wound, young man, 23 years old, brachial artery involvement and internal bleeding from secondary fragmentation. Nobody had caught on the initial scan. I was the one who caught it. I was the one who went back in when everyone else thought we were done. He was alive because I trusted the thing I felt in my hands and did not wait for consensus. I found out later that Dr. OC had been in the observation area above the OR. I don't know how long she'd been there. I didn't know at the time that she was watching at all. I just did what I always do. I did the work. The next morning she came to my office, a small room I shared with 2 other attendings, barely big enough for the desk, and she sat down across from me and said, "Tell me about the case last night." I told her. She asked questions. Good ones. The kind that weren't looking for a performance, just information. She asked why I went back in. I said because I felt something wrong that the imaging hadn't explained, and I had learned years ago not to dismiss that feeling. She wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up and said, "You have good instincts." She said it the way someone states a fact about weather. I said, "Thank you." She said, "I'm not complimenting you. I'm noting something useful." She left. I sat there for a minute staring at the door. 3 weeks later, my father invited us both to dinner. We drove separately. We arrived separately. We sat down at his dining room table, the long dark wood one, the one we'd had my whole childhood, the one that always made me feel like I was testifying, and we ate my mother's pot roast and talked about nothing. Hospital politics, a colleague who'd retired, whether the traffic on the bypass was getting worse. My brother brought up Dr. Osei. He was careful about it. He always is in front of our father. He frames things as concern, as thoughtful observation, not as what they actually are. He said he'd heard she was making changes that weren't entirely aligned with the hospital's culture. He said some staff were uncomfortable. He said he was just sharing what he was hearing. My father nodded slowly. He asked what kind of changes. My brother looked at me for a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. Then he said, I think some of her preferences may be creating tension in certain areas. The trauma department has always had some challenges, meaning me. He meant me. My father looked at me and said, How are things going for you, sweetheart? I put my fork down. I said, Fine. He said, You know the offer stands. There's a position in the cardiothoracic research division. It's not clinical, but it's respected work. You'd have reasonable hours. You could. I don't want reasonable hours, I said. The table went quiet. My brother cleared his throat. My father said, I'm just saying it's an option. I said, I know you're just saying it's an option. You've been saying it's an option for 4 years. The answer is still no. My mother got up to get the dessert. 6 days later, a patient came in who changed everything. She was 51 years old. She'd been brought in by ambulance from a rear-end collision on the interstate, conscious but deteriorating. Blood pressure dropping in a pattern that told me exactly what was happening before the scans came back. Aortic injury. The kind that kills people not because it can't be fixed, but because it moves faster than most surgical teams are ready for. My brother happened to be in the ER for an unrelated consult when she arrived. I don't know why he did what he did next. I have thought about it many times and I still don't fully understand it. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was some deep-wide impulse to be in charge whenever he walked into a room. He told the ER attending he'd handle it. He doesn't do trauma. He hasn't done trauma surgery in 7 years. He has no trauma privileges at Mercy General. The attending hesitated. My brother is a senior physician with our father's name and a confident voice, and he spoke like the decision had already been made. I was 20 feet away reviewing another chart. The attending looked at me. I don't know if it was accident or instinct. He just looked at me. I walked over. I looked at the chart. I looked at the imaging that had just come up. I looked at the patient. I said, This is my case. My brother said, I've got it. I said, You don't have trauma privileges. This is my case. The ER was not quiet. ERs are never quiet. But the people immediately around us went still in the way people go still when they know something is about to happen. My brother said quietly, for my ears only, Don't embarrass yourself. I said nothing. I put on my gloves. He stood there for another 3 seconds, then he stepped back. I operated for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The patient survived. She was in recovery by the time the night shift started, and her daughter, who'd driven 2 hours to get there, was sitting beside her bed holding her hand when I came to check in. I went home. I showered. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall for about 10 minutes. Then I went back to sleep. What I didn't know until later was what had happened in the hospital that evening while I was operating. My brother had gone upstairs. He had requested an urgent meeting with the chief of medicine, a man named Dr. Beaumont, who had been in that role for 11 years and who had known my father since residency. My brother told Dr. Beaumont that I had interfered with a case, that I had acted in an unprofessional and potentially dangerous manner, that my behavior was creating liability concerns, and that he believed I needed to be reviewed. He filed a formal complaint against me. I found out the next morning when my department chief, a quiet, careful man who I had always respected, called me into his office and told me with visible discomfort that there was going to be a review process, that it was standard procedure, that I shouldn't read too much into it. I asked what I was being accused of. He told me. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I'd like to submit documentation. He said, of course. I went back to my office and I opened the files I had been keeping for 2 years. Every case, every outcome, every decision logged and time-stamped and annotated, including the patient from the night before, including the attending's initial hesitation, including every single fact of what had actually occurred. I submitted all of it, and then I went back to work, because there were patients and the patients did not care about any of this. The review process took 11 days. I went to work every one of those 11 days. I was professional, I was thorough. I did not discuss the situation with colleagues. I did not call my father. I did not look at my brother when we passed each other in the building, which happened twice, and both times he looked away first. On the evening of the 11th day, my department chief called me and said the review committee had concluded. He said the findings were in my favor. He said the documentation I'd submitted had been extremely thorough. He said that word like it surprised him a little. I thanked him. He said there was one more thing. He said Dr. Asay had requested to speak with me in the morning. I said I'd be there. I arrived at Dr. Osei's office at 7 in the morning. She was already at her desk with coffee and her leather notebook. She gestured at the chair across from her. She said, "You've been at this hospital for 2 years." I said yes. She said, "In those 2 years, your surgical outcomes are in the top 8% of the department. Your complication rate is below departmental average. You've been on call beyond your required hours 43 times." I counted. I didn't say anything. She said, "You also haven't applied for a single grant, haven't pursued a leadership role, haven't published anything since your second year of residency. You're working at about 60% of your actual capacity. Do you know why I think that is?" I said I had some thoughts. She said, "Because some part of you learned to make yourself smaller, and I think you've been waiting for someone to tell you to stop." The room was very quiet. She picked up her coffee and looked at me over the rim of it. She said, "I'm offering you the Associate Director of Trauma Surgery position. It's a new role, starts next quarter. You'd be overseeing the junior attendings, contributing to protocol development, and you'd have a formal research allocation for the first time. It comes with a title change in the compensation adjustment." She paused. "I'd also like you to present our G's Welcomes data at the Regional Trauma Conference in October. The case from last week is exactly the kind of thing the field needs to hear about." I looked at her. She said, "I've been watching you since I got here. I needed to see who you are when no one is looking. Now I know." She set down her coffee. "I don't run departments on reputation. I run them on performance. Yours is excellent. The rest is noise." She slid a folder across the desk. She said, "Take the weekend. Let me know Monday." I took the folder. I stood up. I said, "I don't need the weekend." She looked at me. I said, "I'll take it." She nodded like she'd expected that and went back to her notebook. I called my mother that night, not my father, my mother. She listened to the whole thing. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. I should have said it more. That hit me somewhere I didn't expect." I told her I knew. She said, "Your brother is going to be very upset." I said I imagined he would be. She said, "Your father is going to say something about it. He's going to frame it as concern." I said, "I know." She was quiet again. Then she said, "You should let him, and then you should go back to work." That's the most useful thing my mother has ever told me. My brother found out on Monday when the announcement went to department heads. I wasn't in the room. I heard about it secondhand from a colleague who witnessed his reaction, the way he went very still and then very controlled, the way people do when they've understood something they didn't want to understand. He didn't call me. He didn't come to my office. I didn't seek him out either. My father called on Tuesday evening. He said he'd heard about my new role. He said he hoped I knew what I was taking on. He said it was a significant responsibility. He said all of it in his careful, measured voice, the one that never quite commits to anything. Then he paused, and he said, "Your outcomes have always been very good. I've seen the numbers." For my father, that is nearly everything. I said, "Thank you." He said, "Don't let it go to your head." I said, "I won't." We hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment. Then I put on a pot of coffee, sat down at my desk, and started drafting the protocol revisions I'd been turning over in my head for 18 months. The ones I'd never written down because I hadn't thought anyone would listen, Someone was listening now. I wrote until 2 in the morning. It was the most awake I'd felt in years. There's something nobody tells you about being underestimated your whole life. They don't tell you that the silence you practice, the patience, the documentation, the refusal to perform your competence for people who've already decided what you are, all of it is preparation, not for revenge, not even for vindication, exactly for the moment when someone finally looks at the work and sees it clearly. You don't get to choose when that moment comes. You can only make sure that when it does, there's something real to see. I had made sure of that. Every single day, for years, I had made sure of that. And now the floor was mine. I think about Mr. V a lot, the retired school teacher, his wife in the waiting room with her hands folded so still. The way she held mine afterward and said, "God sent you to us." I didn't know what to say then. I still don't really. But I know that she wasn't wrong about one thing. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, not because of luck, because I had spent years making sure I deserved to be there. That's the part nobody sees when they watch someone succeed. They see the moment Dr. O.C. slid that folder across the desk. They see the title change and the conference invitation and my brother going very still when the announcement went out. What they don't see is the 5 years before that, the 6 a.m. break room, the files I kept when nobody asked me to, the 43 times I stayed on call past my hours because the patient needed it, and I was the one who could help. None of that was strategy. It was just who I decided to be, over and over, when it would have been easier to be someone smaller. My brother made a choice too. Every time he walked into a room and used our father's name as a door, he was making a choice. Every time he filed a complaint instead of examining his own record, he was building something, just not what he thought he was building. What he built was a case, not against me, against himself. The review committee didn't need to take my word for anything. The documentation spoke without me in the room. That's what I mean when I say the work is the argument, not the loudest voice, not the most connected family, the actual record of what you did when it was hard and no one was watching. Dr. Osei told me she needed to see who I was when no one was looking. I didn't know she was looking. That's exactly the point. You cannot perform integrity. You either have it built into your daily choices or you don't. And eventually, not always quickly, not always cleanly, but eventually that difference becomes visible to the people who matter. I am not angry at my father anymore. I was for a long time. But he gave me something unintentionally. He gave me the need to be undeniable, to be so thoroughly, documentably good at what I do that no amount of reputation management could obscure it. That hunger turned into discipline. That discipline turned into outcomes. Those outcomes turned into a folder on Dr. O.C.'s desk that changed my life. What I know now, sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning writing protocols I should have written 18 months ago, is this. The 3 things that carry you are not the ones anyone can hand you. The first is doing right by the people in front of you, even when it costs you something. That's what kept me in that OR when my brother told me to step back. The second is knowing your work well enough to trust your instincts over consensus. That's what sent me back into surgery when everyone else thought we were done. The third is refusing to quit the version of yourself that you know is real, even when every room you walk into tries to tell you that version doesn't belong there. My brother is still at Mercy General. We don't talk much. I don't carry that as a wound anymore. Some distances are just the honest shape of things. The floor is mine now. I intend to use it.